Well, folks, today we are in the second lesson of a series of 5 lessons that make up our final unit, which is that of unit number 3. And as we know, unit 3 deals with that of God is all powerful. And we talk about God being all powerful. That falls under the heading of God is omnipotent. He can do all things. He is truly all powerful. But before we get into this lesson, we have to go back and actually cover the lesson that we had of last week. Last week's lesson, as you recall, we dealt with power to impart wisdom. That came from one of the general letters of Paul of 1 Corinthians. It was a letter that really we didn't give much of an introduction to. And we didn't give an introduction last week because of the fact, you recall, we was trying to do 2 lessons in that 45-minute period. But I'm not going over that lesson in great detail, but just to highlight some things, the reason why this lesson deals with God being all powerful, because it talks about imparting wisdom. And if you recall, I asked a question that if you could say today, what is your strength? Each one of us have a strength. If you say your strength may be that of, let's say, cooking, as I brought up last week. Well, it's a good strength to have. But when God calls you home, what happens to that strength? It's gone. So we are entrusted to impart it to others, which means you now pass it on to someone else. So now you set them down, show them how to properly prepare a meal, how to cook things. The same can be said for someone who's mechanically inclined or good with your hand with troubleshooting and problem solving. It's good to have an apprentice. Somebody even call it a disciple, someone you can train and teach along the way. But when it comes to that wisdom, I reflect upon Pastor Jackson, who would always give us those words of wisdom, those wise stories, those wise sayings that we talk about even to this very day. Because wisdom is power. So we deal with God and omnipotent. There used to be a saying in the school system that knowledge is power. Do they still use that, Sandra? I remember, what's the other old one for us coming up? It was something they said about that mouse going to college. I don't know if y'all remember that. They about send a mouse to college or something. It was about raising money to send kids to college. But knowledge is power. I think it's Proverbs that says that the beginning of knowledge is the fear of the Lord, but only a fool will despise wisdom and instruction. So wisdom brings forth power. But the reason why Paul had written this letter this time to Corinth is that Corinth was dealing with a lot of problems, or let's say a lot of concerns. I guess that's a better way to put it. But one of the concerns that he was dealing with to write this part of Corinthians was that the people were being, I'm not going to say taught, but they were facing a lot of concerns from those outside the church, were bringing a lot of things of philosophy and that of worldly wisdom, or you could say man's wisdom, in which Paul wanted to understand that even though the people of the world considered the spiritual things of God as being foolishness, God's wisdom far surpassed theirs. Because the people of the world, you'll find, could not understand the things of God because they were not spiritually discerned. In other words, like that saying we use for people outside of our culture, we say it's a black thing, and they don't quite get it. But the funny part about that is the people of the church, I could say, have more wisdom than those in the world. Because one aspect you have to look at is this way. We can understand the world. Because guess what? We came out of that world. And we're still a part of that world, but we're not, you could say, really in that world. But yet the people of the world can't begin to understand the church. They have no concern, no liking as far as even being involved in it. So Paul wanted to let them know that wisdom of God was most important. That man's wisdom is something that not to pay any attention to really that way if we had gotten to the lesson. Otherwise, it doesn't compare with the things of God. So he wanted to impart that upon them to be wise in the things that are of God. But now that brings us to another lesson that we have today. Today's lesson is talking about parting the Red Sea. And we're coming out of fitting a good book for this because we're dealing with Exodus, the second book of the law, which deals with drawing out or the coming out. And we talk about this power to impart wisdom and parting of the Red Sea. This is a powerful story here that deals with God's power being put on display. But you'll find that God's power was on display quite a bit even before this came about. If you recall, some of the things that went on is that, one, you remember, when God sent Moses and Aaron back to Egypt. To keep that in mind, and we always look at just Moses, but you find that Moses and Aaron was together on this. When he sent them back to Egypt, Moses even asked a question that says that, when I go to them, who shall I say has sent me? And God said, you tell them that it is I am that I am. That talks about his omni, I'm all things, have sent thee. Moses and Aaron goes back. God shows his power in that. You remember Moses now lays down his staff. And what happens with the staff? It turns into a snake. But then Pharaoh says, what is that? He brings in one of his men and he does what? He does the same thing. Oh yeah, Reverend Morris, but something different happened after that. What happened with Moses' staff? Well, it turned to a rod, but it devoured that snake, and then it turned back into a rod, showing God's power. Then we have where God's power was put on display. I might have had these in a chronological order, but I should be pretty close. But you'll find that the first thing he did was he turned all the water in Egypt to what? There we go. You said wine, but some drinking folks, boy. He turned all the water in Egypt into blood. Even not just in the Nile River, but if they had it in a cup, they had it in a basin, it immediately turned into that of blood. Power put on display. Then after this, you'll find that came out of the Nile River a multitude that you couldn't even begin to number of frogs. Frogs just everywhere. It talks about them being in their beds and all over them and things of that nature. Then you'll find after the frogs came the lice and the gnats all over them. After the lice and the gnat, then came the flies. After all these things that we mentioned, all of them are truly displays of power and they're truly things that would bother you. I think the flies might get me the most. I don't know about you, I can be in the house and I have one fly, Wallace. I'm fighting that thing. I got to kill it before I sit down. But just imagine flies just everywhere, all over you. Soon after the flies, I believe that's when they had the pestilence upon the cattle, where all the cattle started to die off. After the cattle died off, then you had boils upon the humans, upon their bodies, sores everywhere. Then after this, then hail came from heaven, and it says it destroyed pretty much over half the crops. Then after the hail came, guess what? The locust came and ate the rest of that was left. Then it talks about darkness, so dark that you could almost cut it with a knife, as it would say, for 3 days. Then you had that of the death of all the firstborn in Egypt, unless what? All the firstborn in Egypt would die unless something was done. They put the blood of the sacrificial lamb over the door and die in the sides, and then it says that God said, I will pass over you. And at that point then, you find that Pharaoh allowed the slaves to be set free. The slaves now have gone, and God is leading them along the way, and we'll cover some details of that if we get into it. But all that brings us to the lesson we are at now. The children of Israel have left Egypt, and as they are coming out of Egypt, now we have Pharaoh and the armies are coming after them. But I want to throw something out there just to get your minds moving this morning. What are your thoughts? Because I had to deal with this a couple of times in years past. When it says that Pharaoh now allowed the people to leave, right? But then it says, is God right? How about this? Is God right by this? Or what do you think about this? It says God then hardened Pharaoh's heart to cause Pharaoh now to come after them. What's your thoughts on that? Someone asked you that question, why would God do something like that? He let them go free. But now here they come after him because of God's action. Now Pharaoh's coming after them. There's a couple ways to look at it. And that is the first and foremost one. Because when he does this, it says in the Bible, this is why he did it. To show what? His power. Then I'm going to show you how powerful I am over Pharaoh and shall defeat Pharaoh. And keep in mind, too, I don't have time to go into all this. When he defeated Pharaoh, he literally defeated all those other so-called gods of Egypt at the same exact time. But it says God hardened his heart. But what's your thoughts on that? There we go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I like the way else you said that. He explains that in Romans. See, with the Bible, you have to read it and understand it and study it in its, I call it its totality. You can't look at this book and stop there. You'll find later as you go on, you'll find something else that's being said. But here, another way you can look at it is that, yes, God hardened his hearts, Let me turn the noise off. Let God harden his heart. But some have looked at it as God hardened his heart. I don't want to lose here, by his actions that caused Pharaoh's heart to be hardened. What I mean by that is this. It's not literally that God says, boom, I touched him and his heart is hardened. It's because of things God did that stayed on his mind. They said, I'm not going to let this happen. It's like, let's use what's going on today in Israel, the Palestinians and the Muslims, Islam, all that whole group. They have warred for how long? That's a good number. That's a good number. When you say, long as we know, always have war one against another. They have animosity and hatred back and forth. You look at the recent events that went on just a couple of years ago. Remember when Hamas came in and took people hostage and so on? How many people died on each side? More than we can ever think of, probably won't know. Now they say they're going to have what? Peace. Right, okay. They say they will have peace. How long do you think peace is going to last? Right. You know why it won't last? Because nobody can move forward. They're always going to remember something to look back. You know, they killed my mother, my grandfather. I lost my aunts. Their heart is hardened because of what it is you've done. So later they come back on you. Some have explained it when they mean by God. I'm not saying this is accurate, but they say when they say God has hardened his heart and shown forth his power, because of God defeating Pharaoh, Pharaoh let him go. But as he sits there, now his hearts get hard because he thinks about what God has done. So literally God has hardened his heart. That's some way they explain it. But regardless of the matter of how you look at it, guess what? God is omnipotent. As Sister Morris says, he can do all things at all times, anytime he likes. But now he shows forth his power. The children of Israel now have left, but as they have now left, Pharaoh's heart has been hardened, and now he comes after them. So it starts off, and our lesson says that parting the Red Sea. Now, just to cover a little something here, it says parting the Red Sea. Anybody know where the Red Sea is located at? We hear it all the time from a biblical perspective. The Red Sea, that's why I brought the maps in this morning. We could use them real quick if we're done with it. But where's the Red Sea? They always talk about how the first thing that happened was in the Exodus, the drawing out or the coming out. They left Egypt and they came to where we are now, the Red Sea. And they crossed over into the Promised Land sometime later. But do we know where it's at? Middle East, you're right with that. To show you some things here, now keep in mind, some of the things I'm going to tell you, you might say, wait a minute, Kenny, you're confusing me. But I'm going to tell you why you might think I'm confusing you when we get into it. Now, even that confused you, didn't it? To cover some things, you'll find that Israel, this is a nation of Israel as we see it today. A large body of land, isn't it? From that perspective. But if you look on the stage and where it sits, it's more like we would call it a county. Israel is very, very small compared to the Middle East and all that goes on there. You know, this map is the original, tribes. Then show the new things today. Like down here, this is what's known today as the Gaza Strip. A little small strip of land, but so much fighting is going on there. And your president says he's going to turn it into a resort. But that's a whole other thing to talk about. But you'll find you have the Gaza Strip here. This is Israel. Right here is what's called the West Bank. This is now Lebanon. All this is Syria. I don't know if you saw them on the news. They talked about the Syrian president coming to the United States and all. Here you have the Jordan. Here you have what's called, most people say the Arabian Desert, but we call it Saudi Arabia is where it's located at. But that's a large body of land all around that. To give you another perspective, what you just saw on the map is only, why is my finger right here? That is it. That's all Israel. Other than that, this is Syria. This is the Jordan. This is the Saudi Arabia. All this over here is Iraq. Large body of land all around Egypt, just one little small spot, and they're arguing over these little pieces of land. But where is the Red Sea? Well, you'll find from a biblical perspective, they'll give you a couple of ways to look at this. I think I might have a more of an exploded view on here. We'll use this one. This is this body of land right here. Here we have, this is Africa. All this is Africa. This is the Sinai. Some call it the spear Agatha. They call it a spear because if you look at this, it looks like a spear. And then you have right here the nation of Israel. Scholars will tell you this. Here's where things get confusing at. Scholars will tell you that there's possible 3 routes they took. I only accept one. And who accepts one? Now I'm going to tell you why I accept one. They said there are 3 possible routes. They possibly left here, and they went what's called the northern route. There's a little small body of water right there. They crossed that water, came over to Sinai, and then went into the promised land. I don't buy that for various reasons, but we'll get into that later. Another way was called the central route, which they left the same area. They came down, crossed right about here, and went through the center of what's called Sinai, and then went into the promised land. I call that one, you're getting warmer, but you're not hot yet. The one that I accept is the southern route, in which they left the same area here. They came down, they crossed right there, but then they came down this way, and then went back up. Reason why I said they came down this way is not on here, but there's a place called Merim, and there's a place called Sabbath. The Bible talks about them camping along the Red Sea at Miriam and Sabbath. The Bible tells you that. So most likely, the southern route is a route in which they took. This tip of this body of water here is what we call the Red Sea. Now, you won't see it necessarily on there because in today's world, this is known as the Gulf of the Suez, and this is the Gulf of Aqaba. But both of them connect in this body of water here, which gets to be pretty large. That's called the Red Sea. And here's where some more confusion comes in at. You had 3 routes, right, supposedly. Why is it called the Red Sea? Some say, well, no, it's supposed to be the Reed Sea, R-E-E-D, but they pronounce it red. I'm not buying that one. Some say, well, no, it's because reeds grew on the coastline of the sea. But you'll find that reeds never grew there. The water was too brackish. Because some say it's large amount of salt water, which it is, but the salt water there is very modest. It's not that bad. Some say, well, that R-E-D supposed to be pronounced red because of the volcanic activity. The basin is clay and is red. And oftentimes it will have a reddish look to the water. But you'll find that anyone will tell you who's been here, this water is more turquoise. It's like when you go to an island, the water is so clear and pretty, it's turquoise. It doesn't have that. The reason why it's called the Reed Sea is because in the Hebrew, they pronounce it Yam. Yam, which really means large body of water. This is why some say the southern route. Remember I told you about a little small body of water they crossed? Some call that the Reed Sea. Because that word Yam, it just means a large body of water. But then they call it Yan, I might mess this up, Kuf or Suf, they spell it C-U-P-H or S-U-P-H. It basically means sea of reeds, or the Reed Sea. So it's called the Reed Sea initially because of the Hebrews called it that. But somewhere over time, somebody come up with, it's called the Red Sea. That's what I mean by confusion, all the information I gave you. Now, the question is, why did he say all that? You want to know why I say all that? Because people will teach you things and teach you from their point of view and indoctrinate your mind, you start believing it. What I try to give you is the most accurate information that I can based upon all that's put forth, because this is what all books and historians will tell you, these different reasons. Nobody really knows why. But they do know the Hebrews call it the Reed Sea or the Sea of Reeds. But later, for some reason, people started calling it the Red Sea. But regardless if it's Reed Sea, James River, or whatever you want to call it, they had to cross that body of water. And it was by God's power in which they crossed it. So the importance is, I might have gave you a lot of information, but I gave you accurate information. I didn't just say it's the Red Sea and kept moving with it. Now you understand if somebody brings forth debate, well, just so you know, this is how these things come about. Because many things in history, guess what? There's speculation about, isn't it? And largely because of oral history, word of mouth, how things can change. But as they come to the now just Red Sea, it says in Exodus 14:10 is where we're starting for anybody using the Bible. It says, and when Pharaoh drew nigh, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them, and they were so afraid. And the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. But starts off by saying, and when Pharaoh drew nigh. Pray for me, confuse you again. Here's a question. Which Pharaoh was this? Anybody have an idea? It says when Pharaoh drew nigh. And we know there's many pharaohs because Pharaoh is just a title. It basically means like, let's say you're king or the leader. Just as Caesar. Caesar is not a name. Caesar is a title. Basically means you're the emperor, you're the head, you're the chief. But any idea which Pharaoh this might have been? Most people would tell you that this Pharaoh is one that when I give you a name, you say, oh yeah, I remember that. Because they get it largely from, remember the movie, The Ten Commandments? Great movie, but keep in mind, it has a Hollywood spin on it, okay? It's based upon the Bible, but some things they have interjected in it is not biblical, but still it tells a good story. But you'll find that most people say that Pharaoh at this time was Ramses II. Now, I'm one to ask a question, Roger, when the question comes up. When you say it's Ramses, well, how's it Ramses? I don't just take it by you just telling me that. How did you come to that conclusion? Well, because you find during this time, when the children of Israel were in Egypt, it talked about how they built a city and statues in dedication to guess who? Ramses II. So they would automatically say, guess what? It is Ramses who was the Pharaoh at that time. But, here the but comes in at. We do not know that for certain. But when you do dates, which when time to go into all this, there's another Pharaoh, and somebody tell me how you pronounce his name because I'm going to butcher it, but it's spelled A-M-E-N. I think it's H-O-T-E-P. Amenhotep, something of that nature. Most scholars would tell you that according to chronological and dates and who was in power, who wasn't in power, that most likely this was the man who was actually the Pharaoh during that particular time. But because of movies and things we've been taught, we always say it's Ramses, but they're not certain. Even with this man, they're not 100% certain, but most believe that he probably was the Pharaoh. Once again, why did I give you all that information? To give you the truth, the most accurate information. This is what I mean when I tell you I'll study all week, put in 6-7 hours of study, but no way you can teach all that in a short period of time. But yet I'm giving you the best information I can, let you know who was in power during that time. Because people say, Ramses was Pharaoh and he did so and so. You're like, well, wait a minute. Let's just say Pharaoh for right now because of these reasons. Therefore, you have the accurate information. You're not just running with it. It says that Pharaoh drew nigh. So in other words, regardless of who it was, this was the head man. Perhaps we could call him the most powerful person in the world, who, guess what, was worshipped also as a god. Because Pharaoh was viewed as being gods themselves. So now Pharaoh comes forth. Remember, God's going to show his power over who? Over Pharaoh. They look at Pharaoh, he's a god, where God can show you, well, I'm the one who's omnipotent here. It says that Pharaoh drew nigh, which means Pharaoh came near, the children of Israel lifted up their eyes, and behold, the Egyptians marched after them. So you can imagine the sight, right? All these people now heading for their freedom, and they look up. Here comes Pharaoh and all of his armies with him. And which let me get a little ahead of myself too. Anybody ever heard the question, did Pharaoh die when the waters came upon them? Anybody ever heard that question before? Because you see in the movies, what's that what is a cartoon? Pharaoh always lived, was on the banks of the river screaming back. People say Pharaoh lived. But when you read the scriptures, I'm not going to the ones after this, God said, all these people you see here this day, I remember the first one they said was Pharaoh and his armies came near because Pharaoh led his forces. God said, you will see them no more. Later after this, talks about how Pharaoh and his army pursued in afterward. So why all of a sudden everybody died except Pharaoh? But that's that Hollywood spin and stuff that we see. But you find that all of them died. But as they came after him, Egyptian, he said they were sore afraid. Now here's where I've seen where we would say, I wouldn't have been afraid. And why? I got God on my side. I'm like, yeah, that's easy for you to say now. You know, your hindsight had that going, but you hear that. So why are they afraid? They just had God lead them out. But here's a question. How strong do you think their faith was? I mean, you think about it. Because when you read the Bible, you have to also study the times, the places, the events, and what went on and all that. Think about their life. They had been in slavery for how long? 430 years. And how do we know that? Because the Bible says in Exodus, it was in 430 years they were in slavery. So that meant the original people who went into slavery had already died off, right? Now all these other people had came up after them. How many prophets do you think they had at this time? How many people were preaching about God? Maybe some, spreading the word. But keep in mind, they also lived in a polytheistic society in which they worship any and all gods. Imagine people that, now, we don't know for certain, but let's say they're into slavery. They might have viewed it as, guess what? God has what? There you go. I'm in slavery all these years. Where is this God? Think about their faith. You can look at it that way. Because keep in mind, some of them, all they knew was what? All of them, all they knew was slavery. That's their whole life. All they knew was slavery. So they say, I'm going to worship this God who's my redeemer, who's my salvation, but yet I'm still in slavery. Their faith might have been that strong, and I don't think it was that strong because I'm going to show you as we go a little further things that were said to make you know, now their faith wasn't that strong. But yet they went through a lot because all they knew was that. It's like Harriet Tubman, right? Anybody know how many people she saved? If I stay behind me, please. If I'm not mistaken, she made like 13 trips through the Underground Railroad. And she said she never lost a passenger. Directly, she saved directly 70 people. Directly. Indirectly, in South Carolina, there was a raid on this ferry where she was a spy for the Union Army, where they saved another, I think it was 470 people, which indirectly she saved. So it said that altogether she saved 450, 460 people. And know what her words was to that? When I how many people she saved? She said, I would have saved more if they knew they were slaves. Otherwise, they didn't realize, because this is all they know. Some people didn't want to go free because all they knew was this life. So you have to look at how these people were living then. All they were slaves, living there. Now they've been bought out, and here comes Pharaoh army after them, and they say, we're so afraid. I think you should be afraid. Some say, well, they had God, but yeah, their faith wasn't that strong. And keep in mind, I'm looking at it, this might not be a good analogy. I look at it this way. I'll say there was an abusive relationship. What I mean by that, don't you see today when people go through, I said, mental crisis, mental illnesses, they have an abusive relationship, they'll call the cops, and what do? I'm not pressing any charges. He loves me and beating you to death. But that's been beat into you. You know, somebody else will call the cops or do the same thing, and they will say, nothing happened here. Because they've been beaten down so long that they don't realize that they're in the situation they're in. They don't realize they're a slave. You know, we're trying to set you free. So here, they have every reason to be afraid. Because I'm quite sure they don't think that Pharaoh's coming to take them back. Here comes an army after me. We're about to be slaughtered. That's probably how they view things. It's saying the children of Israel cried out unto the Lord. Well, that's one thing they did right. Now, you can't say that faith is strong at this point, but they do understand of God. And I think they understand who God is, along with all these other gods that they may have been worshiping. But they see themselves as being in trouble, so what they do, they cry out to God. And they cry out to God immediately. I've always been a strong advocate, Roger, that if you're going through something, pray quick. But sometimes what we do, we let it fester and we go on and on. I'm going to take care of this thing. I'm going to fix it myself. Then it gets so deep that then you say, let me call God now. But you waited so long. I've told you before, you know, people, you know, need help. We tell them, here you go. Here's a few dollars. Help you out. You come back later, Diane, need some help. Don't worry, we got you. We take care of it. And my household ain't rich. But then I have them come back and they said, it's Helen, I need some help with the house note. We said, what's going on? Bruno, they say, I'm 3 notes behind. I said, you come to the wrong house. You waited too late. You let it build up instead of stepping out there first. But oftentimes this can be the case. Let things fester, let things build up till they get out of hand. So you go to God, you should go to God immediately. And then see how God works the thing out. But I do applaud them for crying out to God and seeking that of help. But here's what they said in verse 11. And they said unto Moses, and we say they said, there's that ministry that's been around for years, that ministry known as they. They said unto Moses these words, because there were no graves in Egypt, hast thou taken us away to die in the wilderness? Wherefore hast thou dealt with us to carry us forth out of Egypt? We just said they cried out to God, right? Now faith was strong. But you can see right now they already think themselves are being defeated. And they're fussing at who? Looking at Moses. Just that quick they said, Moses, there weren't enough graves in Egypt? You brought us out here that we may die. Moses never said anything to them about he was the one to bring them out. He always says God is the one who's going to deliver you. First thing they do is they cry to God, but then they tell him, Moses, you're the problem. You brought us out here that we may die because there weren't enough graves yet in Egypt. Saying, why did you even do this thing? Looks like to me they're thinking back to the old days. I once heard, oh my God, what's his name? What's his name? Pastor, try to remember something here. Former pastor of Providence. Reverend Samuels, there you go. Reverend Samuels preached a sermon here. Where are the good old days? He said, no such thing as the good old days. He said, we had some good times, but we had no good old days. And he went through this whole litany of thing, how people always talk about, we need to go back to the old days. I even heard some of this in recent times, dealing with our economy. He went through the whole list of how the hardships we came up with and how we were treated. He said, the good old days, back when I had to cut wood for heat. He said, the good old days where I had to go down through the woods, use the bathroom. He said, the good old days I had to draw water out the well. The good old days where I had to eat in the back and couldn't eat up front with everybody else. And the good old days where I had to sit here and couldn't go in here. I went through this whole litany of things. He said, now guess what? We had some good times, but I don't know about some good days. And one person he brought up, well, you remember, you could go to the store with a nickel or a dime and get a whole bag of cookies. And gas went for 25 cents. And he said, yes, you're right about that, but you only made $10 a day. But we look back and say, oh, that was the good old days. Now here's some good times. But so quickly, these people, by not knowing, I said they were slaves, what they want to do? They want to go back to Egypt. They said, I don't want to be out here. Take me back to Egypt. That's literally what they're saying to Moses. It says in verse 12, is not this the word that we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? For it had been better for us to serve the Egyptians than that we should die in the wilderness. See how quick they want to go back to the old lifestyle? Just that quick. Now, in his posture book, it says nowhere in the Bible does it ever say where they told Moses they didn't want to go. He said, nowhere it says this. But keep in mind, is everything written in the Bible? No, not everything in the Bible, but with your, as a instructor once told me, you have to use your theological imagination. I can guarantee this is what they said. Because keep in mind, every time that Moses brought forth, or God used Moses to bring forth one of his plagues, hardships came upon the people. In other words, God would do this plague upon them, and Pharaoh said, let them go. Then Pharaoh come back, make them work, and don't give them water. Make them work, but don't give them straw to make bricks with. Otherwise, he made life difficult and hard for them each time along the way. So you can imagine them saying to him now, Moses, you need to go. You're causing problems. Let me give you an example. And some of y'all came up in that area. I was too young for it. I'm telling you, I wasn't around for Martin Luther King. I was too young. I was a little toddler back then. But I know stories of people saying that when that man, I'm gonna say it that way, Diane. When that man was out here, some say he caused more problems for Negroes than enough. Because the things he was marching for, he wanted people to live a better life, but guess what? Hardships came upon you. Otherwise, this man started a lot of trouble. On my job, they're doing this and that because of what Martin Luther King is preaching, what he's talking about. So those in power made life difficult for everybody else, where people were saying that Martin got to go. But guess what? Now he's a martyr, and he's the greatest man there ever was. Malcolm X, same way, causing problems, but now people will lift him up. But it's funny how quick we can forget things and look at them from a whole different perspective. But here we find, is not this the word that we did tell the Egyptians, saying, let us alone that we may serve the Egyptians? Most likely they probably murmured against Moses. They didn't want to do this thing. Because I can give you an example right now. Remember when Moses went to the mountaintop? Show how fast they can turn? And they said he was gone so long. They said, what has become of this man? They said, let's make us a new God. Because we don't know what happened to Moses. That shows you that they were worshiping Moses more than they were God. And they turned this just that quick. Keep in mind, not long after that, a family under the name of Korah, they rebelled against Moses. Aaron and Miriam said, who made you all so great that you are to lead? We can lead this people also. That God ended up opening up the ground and all of them were devoured at one time. In other words, they were very quick to turn back against Moses. Even God said, this is a stiff-necked and hard generation. So I shall get rid of them all and raise up rocks to praise my name. So even though that's not written in the Bible, what it says here is not this word we did tell thee in Egypt, saying, let us alone. We can sort of surmise that they probably said a few things against that. But you can see here, they're already talking about they're going to die, right? But they call upon God. You call upon God, but you say you're going to die anyway? Where's your faith? That's like in the book of Acts, the 12th chapter. Herod, at this time, captured James, the brother of John, one of the disciples, and he had him executed by the sword. And he said he looked and saw that it pleased the Jews. He said, I'm going to kill Peter also. Had Peter arrested. Peter was arrested and thrown in prison and chained up to 2 guards at the same time. He said, well, we can't kill him now. We have to wait till after the Passover, because you can't kill him by doing Passover time. Wait till after, and we'll kill him. That night, you find God sent an angel, and they loosed the chains off of Peter. Peter goes to the first gate, and it's open, and he's wondering, like, am I dreaming here? He gets to the second gate, and that's open. He says, this can't be a dream. He walks out. Now, when he was put in prison, it said that they prayed for him continually in the prison. As he goes out, he goes to the house of a woman by the name of Rhoda. It says he gets to the gate, he knocks on the door. As he knocks on the door, she comes to the door. As they're inside praying for Peter, right? She recognizes Peter's voice. Follow behind me in your Bible, study this week. He hears Peter's voice, and she recognizes that it's Peter, Roger. You know what she does? She runs back and tells everybody else as they're praying, Peter's at the door. You know what they tell her? Girl, you want to get out of that crazy mess? But guess what? They're praying to Peter be released. He's knocking at the door, and he still don't believe it. Then they finally open the door, and they recognize that it's him. He told them, hold your peace. And then he said, let me tell you what God did for me. And he starts doing all the talking. But that's the power of prayer. That's why I said their faith, they better have some faith. That faith wasn't that strong. You can see they call on God in 1 minute. Next minute, they say they're going to die. They start blaming Moses. But look what Moses says here. It says here, verse 13, and Moses said unto the people, fear not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. Now, you can see whose faith is strong there, don't you? Moses. Can you imagine this large multitude of people coming against you? That's a tough thing to deal with. If you're one before a crowd and everybody's coming at you, what are you supposed to do? But Moses, you'll find, is in the majority. And why I say he's in the majority is that he has one individual on his side, and that's God. And whenever God on your side, you are in the majority. It's like, it's not long after this, you remember they sent the 12 spies to spy the promised land? And you'll find that when they came back, the majority of 10 said, we can't go over there. Them people too strong. But Caleb and Joshua said, yes, we can take this land. Some said they was in minority. I said, no. They said, yes, it was. It was 2 against 10. I said, no, it's 3 against 10. Because when you have God on your side, you are the majority. And you'll find that that's the way that it works here. But he says, fear not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord. So he's showing God power here by telling them, guess what? You don't have to do a thing. You just stand still. And watch, see the salvation. Otherwise, see how God's going to rescue. He says, fear not, but stand still. But I'm going to show another twist on this at the very end. It says, which he will show to you tomorrow. Oh, he could do it right then and there, tell him. See, that's the God we serve. God said, stand still, fear not, and see the salvation of the Lord today. Other words, say, God is going to save you today, right here and right now. He said, for the Egyptians whom you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever. And who was the first one they saw? They saw Pharaoh. Pharaoh coming along with his armies. So that's why I always say when they ask that question, did Pharaoh die? Well, he was the first one they saw. And God said, you're going to see them no more. He said, the Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. Now, here's why I put the different spin on it. I always like to show you things that you haven't seen before. Now, it could be saying this. It could not be saying this. But let's just imagine that maybe he is saying this. All these folks are coming at Moses, right? And everybody looks at it as he's talking so beautiful and eloquent words and calm and cool by saying, you brought us out here to die. And he says to them, fear not, stand still and see the salvation of the Lord, which he shall show you today. For the Egyptians you have seen today, you shall see them again no more forever. The Lord shall fight for you, and you shall hold your peace. Some say that part of hold your peace means just stand still and watch. I've been taught, he said earlier, stand and see the salvation of the Lord. But now he's saying hold your peace, because they was already murmuring against him. So one instructor once told it to me this way. He said, we don't have exclamation marks here. We don't know the power and passion and conviction that he has with his word, but it is a true living word. So you have to read it like it is, speaking directly to you, which it is. He said, it could be saying this. And Moses said unto the people, fear not, stand still, and see the salvation of the Lord. The Lord shall fight for you, and you shall shut up. He said, hold your peace. All of them running their mouth at him. He said, stand still. Don't be afraid. God's going to save you. And guess what? He says, keep your peace. He basically says, just shut up. Don't say a word. Just stand there and watch what's going to happen. He could have said that. People come at him in that manner. Now, I'm not saying he did, but looking at the scripture, it kind of looks that way when you see it. He said, the Lord shall fight for you, and ye shall hold your peace. He already told him, stand still. Now he's saying, hold your peace. I look at it more, he's saying, keep your mouth shut. Don't say another word. You're like Job. Remember what Job said in like the 39th through the 40th chapter? Job says, God is almighty and God is never wrong. And God is always right, but God is wrong today because God is punishing me and I didn't do anything. But yet God is never wrong, but I desire to have a counsel before God. And he kept saying these things back and forth till the God stood before him and said, stand up, gird up your loins like a man. In other words, put your pants up. He said, where were you when I made the earth? Where were you when I laid the foundation? And he went through this whole litany of thing to 3 chapters. Then the end it says, and Job says, I put my hand over my mouth, and the tongue cleaved to the roof of my mouth, and I couldn't say a word. Otherwise, time for him just to shut up. And here's what Moses said there, stand still, keep quiet and watch what God is going to do. And the Lord said to Moses, wherefore criest thou unto me? Speak unto the children of Israel that they go forward. But lift thou up thy rod and stretch out thy hand over the sea and divide it, and the children of Israel shall go on dry ground through the midst of the sea. So God gave them marching orders. He said, all they got to do is tell them, get up, go forward. In other words, they couldn't go backwards. The army was there. There was no left or right. They only had one obstacle. That's to go forward. And God told them go. And even not only did he part the Red Sea, some parts that people miss is to say, you're going to go forth on dry ground. That's something to think about. You're going forth on dry ground. God said it. Moses didn't question it like, well, how is this going to happen? And what is it going to be? He just took it on his faith, on his word. And it says, behold, I will harden the heart of the Egyptians, and they shall follow thee. And I will get my honor upon Pharaoh and upon all the hosts, upon his chariots and upon his horsemen. I will get my honor upon who? Pharaoh. So I don't know why the movies and everybody says Pharaoh lived. All them that Egyptian that you saw today, you shall see no more. And they followed after. I'm going to read through this real quick. It's time to close out. And the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord. Remember when he sent Moses and Aaron there? He said, who shall say that has sent me? And God said, you tell them that it is I am that I am have sent thee. And here we see this somewhat coming back upon them. It says in Egyptians, verse 18, the Egyptians shall know that I am the Lord, who have gotten me honor upon Pharaoh, upon his chariots, and upon his horsemen. And the angel of God, which went before the camp of Israel, removed and went behind them, and the pillar of cloud went before their face and stood behind them. Because you remember when they went out, they had a pillar of a cloud to lead them by day, and fire at night. Now you'll find God has the angel behind and the cloud in the front. In other words, God says, I got you covered. Just move forward. It said, and it came to pass, it came between the camp of Egyptian and the camp of Israel, and it was a cloud and darkness to them, but it gave light by night to these, so that one came not near the other all night. And Moses stretched out his hand over the sea, and the Lord caused the sea to go back by a strong east wind all that night, and made the sea dry land, and the waters were divided. And the children of Israel went into the midst of the sea upon the dry ground, and the waters were a wall upon them on the right hand and on the left. So we see the visual there that all that night, the wind blew, the wall of water on each side, dried the ground out, and all they had to do now was just walk through. Now we know the rest of the story, what went on there. But it shows us here but one thing, that God is omnipotent. Remember, we had three main subjects this quarter, units 1, 2, and 3. The first one was that God is always present, which means he is what? He's omnipresent. The next one basically said that God knows all things, which means God is what? Omniscient. He knows all things. And this quarter we're dealing with God is all powerful, which means he is what? He is omnipotent. Like I said, they don't use that terminology, but you'll find that each time we leave a lesson or deal with a lesson, it's speaking of one of the omnis of God and how powerful he is. So here he shows his power over Pharaoh, over his chariots, or his army, but also, guess what? You have a people here, Brenda, that has a weak faith. After seeing this, their faith should be built up. Because keep in mind, Jesus did miracles for one reason. That was to show them who he was. Because even that, he never even called a miracle. Look at the Bible. Jesus never called them miracles. He said, I do this as a sign to show you something. So here you'll find that God now shows the children of Israel his power. You've seen it firsthand and know that you've never seen nothing like this before. That this is the omnipotent God. Because let's be honest, folks, what do we say today about Scripture? We say we walk by faith and not by sight. Well, initially, guess what? Everybody walked by sight and then by faith. But once you've seen, you no longer need to see it. You believe in that faith. Because sometimes people have to see to believe. And even Christ did the same thing. He preached the word to them, but he said, but let me now also show them God's power. And God puts his power on display for his people who faith, we can see they had faith in God, but not that strong faith that they should have. But now after seeing God at work, you would think that faith would be strong, wouldn't you? Oh boy, but if I can tell you the rest of the story, it won't long after this, their faith went right back down again. But our lesson next week, it deals with Jesus now calms a storm. We're coming out of Mark, the 4th chapter, using the Bible, verses 35 through 41. Just a few verses. But as you know, I'm going to bring a lot of things that's not in the printed text, but it actually is part of our lesson to show God's power on display. Now keep in mind, we talk about God, right? Omnipotent. Now, why the man all of a sudden writes about Jesus calming a storm? What's the connection there? They're one and the same. Jesus and God is one and the same. This is why you see the writer goes back and forth. Some say, well, we're talking about God, aren't we? But yet you're talking about Jesus. They're one and the same. Even Jesus said, yet I and my Father are yet one. But that deals with Jesus calms a storm. That's come from Mark, the 4th chapter, verses 35 through 41. So with that being said, this ends our lesson, and I hope you got something out of this lesson. And as I said before, I'm going to give you a lot of confusing things, but really they weren't confusing. It was just information that you need to know, because there's speculation upon many things, but people don't often bring that stuff forward. They just say, oh, it's called the Red Sea, and that's it. Well, let me give you the history of how this came to be. And really, we don't know how it came to be, but we do know that it's called the Reed Sea, because the Hebrews always have called it the Sea of Reeds or the Reed Sea itself. But somewhere along the line, I always say an E was left out, instead of calling it Red Sea. But it's actually called in actuality, it should be called the Reed Sea itself. But with that being said, shall we stand to our feet? Deacon Bush, if you don't mind, to give us a closing word of prayer to bring us into the worship service.